Our next reader is Ridley Pearson, who is an Edgar-nominee and best-selling author of more than 50 suspense and young adult adventure novels, including Risk Agent, Walt Fleming, which locals may be familiar with, and the upcoming Super Sons graphic novels for young adults, as well as Peter and the Starcatchers, which he co-wrote with Dave Barry. I'd like to mention that Ridley also plays bass guitar in the band the Rockbottom Remainders, and he is frequently cited in the Wood River Valley. Welcome, Ridley.
Hi. Thanks to the librarian, Jenny, for having me. I don't often read at readings because I would, especially with nonfiction, it's very different, I think, but with fiction, I want it to be you finding whatever that voice is saying. So I usually just tell crazy stories. But when Jenny asks, you do what Jenny asks. So I am going to read. It was decided that I would read something from a work in progress, a new thriller I'm writing. I originally thought I might read from some of the children's stuff I write, and Jenny said, it will be all adults. And I said, okay. Then I thought about reading from White Bone, but I'm doing a thing later in the month here in the Valley for White Bone, so I thought I don't want to repeat myself. For a number of years, I wrote strictly mystery and suspense. And through the research I did there with the FBI and others, I came across, this is a day of reading, so I thought I would share some of this with you. I came across some staggering numbers. When you write about crime, you wonder, what is with all the people in jail. 80% of the felons in maximum security lockup, 80%, 80, are functionally illiterate. When they teach remedial reading in those prisons, recidivism goes down. They get out into society and they can read job applications, they can fill them out. 1 out of 7 adults in the United States of America, 32 million adults, are functionally illiterate. In some studies, that goes up as high as 23% of the population. If you do the math there, it's about 10%. CNN recently reported, this is the one that will, at least, we need airbags in the seat in front of you. CNN reported that 19% of graduating high school students are functionally illiterate. So that got me headed in this whole other direction of education and getting kids reading at a young age. I've written extensively in sort of the middle grade area. I continue to do so. I've had a great time doing it. Somewhere in the process, I was invited to speak at the Literacy Volunteers of America, a conference in Denver. And the amazing thing about that is I sat at a table. It was a table that held 10 people. The other 9 were all survivors of illiteracy, and they told me their individual stories. From near suicide from illiteracy, that was a mother who had memorized, she had memorized a short little chapter book, and when she read it to her child at about age 4, her child could read, and her child said, "Mom, you're on the wrong page. Those aren't the words." And she went and tried to kill herself. She thought that was the end of her life. So, I mean, each of these lives just, completely impacted me. And the greatest thing, the absolute, when you I work for both Disney and DC Comics. And when you write for Disney and DC Comics, you don't do it for the money. Because they don't give you any money. But you do get wonderful letters from parents who say little Johnny was 11, he had never read even the back of a cereal box, and he got a hold of Kingdom Keepers, and we can't keep him out of the library. And you just, those are the best moments. So when last year I guest taught at BSU in the MFA department, and one of the first things I would tell, I'm a huge plotter. I'm like a nuclear plotter, and in my suspense novels. And I had to tell my students, remember, character comes first. So I had run into a former publisher of mine, and he had said, I want to buy your next thriller, but I want it in the voice of a woman, because I had had a huge success with him writing from a first point of view of an 18-year-old woman in 1906. Strange combination. But he said, so write something from a woman's point of view. And I had switched agents, and my new agent said, are you going to write another adult thriller? And I said, well, I've been thinking about this thing, la-di-da-di-da. Well, we've been working on the same 60 pages of this pitch, the first 60 pages of this book, for 18 months. I've rewritten these things 16 times. And what I wanted, and we still haven't submitted it. So this probably still sucks. But what I wanted to do was read you a plot. There's a lot of plot that comes before this chapter. I'm a little scratchy, so I hope I don't have to stop in the middle. But this book is a first-person novel about a professional sports writer. There's murder, there's sex, there's crazy stuff all the way through it. But what I really wanted to get right and want to continue working on with my agent, who won't let me out of this thing, is character. So this is a chapter where she's about 28 or 30, this sports writer, and she's going to interview a big, we lived in St. Louis for a number of years, and she's going to interview a former St. Louis Cardinal. Approaching Guante de Toro for the first time, I felt breathless. Passing through the opening gates, I followed the maple tree-lined red brick paved lane, running straight for 30 yards. After that, it turned slightly left and fell away from the hill, giving no indication of what lay beyond. Only a mist-shrouded forest below, the cold, damp earth being sucked dry by a warm autumn sun. I'd left the St. Louis suburbs and entered a foreign film. I needed a convertible, a big hat, dark glasses, and Hermes scarf caught by wind. Burnished leaves covered the pavers once into the darker forest. The trees, partly bare, clung possessively to what color remained, reds, golden orange, postcard stuff. Why had I agreed to meet him here instead of neutral ground? Curiosity? I knew how that ended up for the cat. To show him I could act unimpressed and professional, to show myself, to prove to myself I wasn't interested in him when I knew I was. I might have known he would not live in a McMansion on a triple lot. Amaldo Alvarez was proving himself unpredictable. I had to watch it. It looked as if he'd bought himself a country club, maybe an entire Missouri county. Translate Spanish to English, Guante de Oro. I stole a glance at my phone's screen. Golden glove. I was in for it. Leave it to Amaldo on this drive. There was no place to turn around. Pulling out of the copse of trees, the road rose, turned, and approached an ivory-covered brick fortress with 5 chimneys, an east-facing turret, slate roof, and porte-cochere large enough for a panel truck. The manor house was fronted by maples and pines. A row of cypress ran to my right, hiding what would turn out to be a park-like playing field with a pool beyond. It might have been a university's president's house, but it was in fact the former governor's private estate. It said something about the state of our society, that it was now owned by an MLB All-Star and 3-time Golden Glove recipient from the Dominican Republic. I recall thinking that would make a good introduction in my article. But before I could organize my thoughts, I spotted a tricycle, a longboard, and an electric scooter jumbled into a pile by the steps, rising to 2 burled walnut wood doors that stood at least 12 feet high. I shut off the engine and breathed as I was instructed to do at the end of my hot yoga class. I shamed myself for anticipating a posse instead of a family. Amaldo was single. I had fact-checked that much. Already off balance, I erected defenses as my pursuit of the interview felt clearly personal. I had an identity to project, professional, accomplished, prepared, but the butterflies told me something else was going on. Why, when I summoned my sports writer persona, the car idling at the doorstep of Guante de Oro, did I find myself undermined by insecurity and loss of confidence? Material worth never impressed me. In professional sports, I was surrounded by it. So what was it? This man was different. He, too, projected a professional face. Perhaps like me, he even hid behind it. My hand remained on the car's ignition, disembodied from the rest of me. The parking area ahead would allow me to turn around easily enough. My eyes fell again upon the bicycles, another deep breath. I opened the car door. The doorbell chimed inside the house. A dog barked, followed by the high-pitched squeals of young children, the bikes, the voices. If not currently married, were there children from a previous marriage? I suddenly had an angle to probe, perhaps form a piece, the secret life of Amaldo Alvarez. His publicity, good and bad, made one think of him as an unapologetic bachelor. I would have forgiven him had a maid answered the door. The grandeur of the home asked for it. The woman before me was Latina in her mid to late 20s. She wore blue jeans and a purple long-sleeve top. She was barefoot. "You're Maggie." "Yes, I'm Val, family secretary, chief bottle washer." If she washed bottles, they were perfume, I thought. She was beautiful, young, and fully at ease with herself. "He's expecting you, please." She waved me inside. We shook hands. Should I take off my shoes? I saw a pile of kids' sneakers and all sizes of flip-flops by a barnwood bench. "You're fine." I was struck by the hominess of the otherwise imposing foyer and the living space beyond. It was Pottery Barn and Restoration Hardware, not Kardashian. The wall art was mostly photographs and landscapes, Mexico City, Tulum, and mist-shrouded mountains, some smaller watercolors, also landscapes hung in the big room. I'd been to dozens of homes of star athletes. Most were trashy, over-the-top showplaces or starkly empty spaces with an Xbox and a couch. The Alvarez mansion was a home. It said nothing. I said nothing, no compliments. I'd learned the hard way to keep my thoughts to myself. The kids, 3 of them, lay and sat on the floor around what might have been Legos. No television in the room. Or if there was one, it was hiding in one of the many large pieces of furniture. The views were of rolling hills, Trick cereal, little evidence of the houses that had to be out there, but were hidden by the landscape. It was harder to be unimpressed. The place was magical. "He'll be right out." Val left for another zip code beneath the shared roof. I knelt by the 3 kids. We smiled at each other. The youngest boy handed me a piece of their construction. I was expected to add to the architecture, but my vision had blurred with that simple gesture. It might have been meant as a peace offering, but I took it as encouragement, a sign that I might yet have a chance to own a moment like this. "My sister's children," he said, standing over me. I startled. "I'm finishing up making some bread. Join me." "Are you showing off?" I asked him, wondering where the hell the words had come from. We entered what looked like a commercial kitchen, more of the same view, a television and couches. This room alone was bigger than my apartment. "Whenever I can," he said, "but it happens no. Edwina is gluten-free and won't eat store-bought. She seems to like my biscuits." I told him that some celiacs could eat sourdough, that starter ferments the gluten. Yes, we tried that. As it turns out, sourdough doesn't go over nearly as well with 8-year-olds as biscuits do. There's a surprise. I slung my bag over the back of the stool next to mine, feeling oddly at home. It was something I would have done if visiting Laura or another of my girlfriends. I faced him as he cut the biscuits from the dough. I would have used a cookie cutter. He used a butter knife and dipped it into water to wet the blade. I admired the precision of his circles, the near perfection of matching sizes. It wasn't done to impress me. He had simply done this many times. "You're making me hungry," I said. "My scones are better." He had smudged some flour on his jaw, strong jaw. I was tempted to tell him. I did not. "Her husband burned her, my sister." I wanted to tell him I could fill in the blanks. I didn't. "A girlfriend, gambling, booze." From what I'd learned, that pretty much described Amaldo as well. "She had been here 3 years now, my mother too. I know it looks big, it is big, but honestly, we use it all. 7 of us live here. More on holidays and summer camp after school's out. My notebook was out and open. Family's important to you." Not exactly like that. Family is everything. In other company, I might have called out the cliche, or I might have awed. He slid the tray into the oven, eased the door shut. He was practiced at it, comfortable. He wasn't doing this for me in the interview. "There, let's sit here if you don't mind." He pointed to a banquette by a large bay window. Most athletes would have simply headed there and expected the reporter to follow. Amaldo waited. "Or we can sit here if you'd prefer." I got up, realizing I had to be careful with him. I chided myself to remain professional. He waited for me and followed. I could feel his eyes on me, like one of those outdoor rafter heaters restaurant cafes use on the patio. We sat down across from one another. I began the interview. He paused before answering. I didn't love it, but it reminded me he'd done this as much as I had. I appreciated he never took us off record. A half hour passed quickly. Val circled in, no doubt to give him an out if he wanted to take it. I found myself wondering if he slept with her, chastising myself for the thought. He stayed with me. At 45 minutes, she orbited again. That time, he didn't so much as glance in her direction. His Dominican upbringing had been hard. He attributed his baseball success to luck. I accused him of false modesty. He said he'd screwed things up for himself repeatedly. He hinted at rehab, but didn't categorize it as such. That matched with rumors, but he said with remorse, and I took it as honesty. Interviews with the bigger stars often led to the self-inflicted trauma of fame and fortune. It was news if a player hadn't been in rehab or divorced or arrested. He was proud of his nonprofit. He tried once again to recruit me. I didn't know if I should take you seriously, I said. Always. You'll know when I'm joking, will I? I felt deeply uncomfortable with the flirty way I'd said it. Future tense, did I want that? He either missed my tone or wasn't interested. I felt equal parts upset at myself and disappointed in him. I don't joke about work with the kids, and I don't talk about it much in interviews either. I'd already uncovered that myself. It was one reason I'd stayed there with him. He was giving me something new, something I could use. It wasn't an accident. When I had enough of the article, I dared ask him, why me? Why open up to me? I worked hard to keep it sounding professional, but the words themselves betrayed me. I want you to work with us. I want you to bring the educational element into what we're doing. I was serious then, I'm serious now. His eyes told me as much. So did the flutter in my chest. Amaldo Alvarez didn't mix business with pleasure. I didn't want to lose my edge. I excused myself and found the bathroom from his directions. I could have used the help of a GPS. Once locked in, I stared into the mirror for a good 30 seconds. I wiped off some mascara fallout from under my eyes. What the fuck was going on with me? I flushed the toilet as cover. Returning, I didn't sit down. Instead, I put my notebook away and gathered my bag when in the face of frontal attack, retreat. Something I said, he was amused by his own joke. I liked that. I liked him. Didn't like myself much for allowing that, thinking that, feeling that. I said, I'll take the meeting with Rich Latner if you or Val or someone wants to set it up. If I do join your team, then this will have to be my first and last interview. I don't exactly love that idea, professional ethics and all. No, he said, I don't like that either. Of course, I might change my mind once I read it. A twinge of a smile, more with his eyes than his lips. I was in too deep. We were in a staring contest. Worst of all, I didn't want to break it off, but I did. The kids, he said, why the tears? Never flinched. That's for another time. That's a maybe. He nodded, looking down as he did. He'd let me win. Unpredictable. You have a business card? I handed him one. He didn't look at it, just set it onto the table because his eyes remained on me. It's impolite to stare, I said. Uh-huh. He paused, letting it play. I nearly giggled like a schoolgirl. If you need a follow-up, Val can arrange it. Right, I said. Goodbye, then. I thanked him for the interview. He waited until I was nearly into the living room. My pleasure, he said, fingering my card once again.